we don't know the solution yet, but given enough time and money and energy, we can find this solution. True or false, I won't go into this here, but certainly the new stories, that the most amazing and fascinating stories which might serve as the basis for a new systems of cooperation in the 21st century world, we are beginning to see them emerging from places like Silicon Valley. I would end then on this tension, on the note of this tension between technology and storytelling, and emphasizing that good technology is never enough. Humans don't dominate the planet because they know how to produce very sophisticated technology. If they don't match this technology with good stories, the result is chaos. The result can be complete destruction. Technology is neutral. It can, technology is never really neutral. It changes the world, but whether it changes it for good or evil really depends on the stories that people believe and the stories that people use in order to organize themselves. I think we can say without any doubt that in the 21st century, we will see amazing new technology, better than anything, much more powerful than anything we've seen previously in history. The really big and interesting question is whether we'll be able to produce good stories to match this wonderful technology. If not, it's going to be very bad news, not only to human beings, but probably to almost all other organisms on the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And then I would like to give the word to Linn Stalsberg, who will conduct the talk after. So you sit here in the bright yellow chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes? Thank you, Professor Harari, for this interesting sweeping through our fictional and less fictional reality, past and present. I was a student here as well in this room studying history for something that feels like 1,000 years ago, before the mobile phone, before the internet, before Google and Facebook, and certainly before any professor in history talked about superhumans and artificial intelligence. So you certainly bring something new to our age and to this room and to the profession. On the floor is Jan Grue, author, linguist, professor in special needs education here at university. You also wrote a review of Harari's book in Klassekampen. Then we have Lene Liebe Delseth, biologist, doing her PhD in paleontology. She's also a concerned scientist, I reckon, talking about environment, and she blogs about her work for anyone who wants to read. So welcome, all of you. And Professor Grue, this is your new title. Your immediate reactions to the talk and any question?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the talk. That was a lot to take in, so I'll have to try and pick my question carefully. I can't help thinking about the 100,000 chimps loose on Wall Street. I think that may be exactly what happened a few years ago. But I mean, I was very interested in your, both in reading your book and then hearing your lecture about your notion of powerful fictions that help us coordinate social action and help us do a number of things. And at the very end of your talk, I started wondering about Google, because in one story, there are technological company, which is, as you say, they're powering the emergence of incredibly sophisticated new technologies in some areas. And in another story, they're an advertising company making 90-something enormous revenue from instructing us in how to buy things from other humans. So which story is the right one in that case?
I think they believe in a third story, even more powerful, that they're basically going to save humankind.
Yeah.
That they are the new leaders or the new gurus, that what governments are not doing, which is thinking seriously about the future of humankind, then it's left to the free market. And many people, especially in Silicon Valley, are convinced that only they have the ability, the information, and the goodness to think about this and to guide us towards the future. And I'm not saying necessarily that this is wrong, and I actually think that it's good that somebody is thinking about the future, because governments apparently are not doing it. But certainly it's very, very troubling that at least their current economic model is based on advertisement. I think that this is a very worrying situation when so much power is concentrated in the hands of a corporation, most of whose revenues comes from convincing us to buy things we don't really need necessarily.
Delseth. Here we have a professor in history, and you're a biologist, and he's kind of entering your field of study, claiming it very confidently as well. What is your reaction to what you heard today?
I really, really like the book, and I found it very interesting that you're actually, in a real way, combining history and biology and trying to see these two things together and to tell a story that's like it properly linked, these two fields. So I've been actually very curious about how you did this, and because I think it's very inspiring that it's possible to combine the natural science and humanities in this way. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how did you do it? How difficult is it? Because sometimes you think that this is a very big divide between these things, but I think your book is proving otherwise.
I think the basic realization is that humans are animals, and we share so much of our instincts, of our emotions, of our desires with other animals, especially other social mammals, that you cannot really understand history and you cannot really understand human society unless you take it to heart that we are part of the animal kingdom. We are not something set apart. Now, of course, you have to resist the temptation to go all the way and to say, okay, so we just need biology and we don't need philosophy and art history and history. If somebody knows biology, he can explain everything, or she can explain everything. This is, of course, not true. There are still differences between us and other animals. Simply knowing our evolutionary history, simply knowing our genetic code and the way that the body functions, wouldn't explain historical phenomena like the rise of Christianity or like the Second World War. There are no strictly biological explanations to such phenomena. So you have to find a middle way. The way that the curriculum in academic institutions is today makes it very, very difficult. As you say, you're all the time pressured to specialize in narrower and narrower fields. Not only biology and history, but even if you specialize in history, so nobody really specializes in history. I for example, specialize in medieval military history. This was my initial field of study and research, things like the Crusades and the 100 Years' War. And you're constantly encouraged not to stray out of very limited boundaries, because nobody is going to write a PhD on the history of the world, and it's extremely difficult to publish articles on wide subjects. The academic world is still governed by the laws of publish or perish, And if you want to publish, then you usually have to focus on, at least at first, on a very, very narrow subject. And then it's a vicious circle, because you get your scholarship or you get your position in university because you're an expert in medieval military history. So they expect you to give classes on medieval military history and to train students in that. And then you are caught in the circle, and suddenly breaking out and starting to read or be interested in biology is very difficult. I don't have an institutionalized answer. On my part, when I got my, how do you say in English, tenure at the university, then I was free of the publish or perish cycle. They couldn't fire me anymore. So even if I don't publish, I won't perish. And this was the moment that I said to myself, okay, now I can do whatever I want. And luckily it succeeded, but there was no guarantee that it would succeed. So I would advise people that to be very wary. I mean, until you get tenure, you are subject to the publish or perish law. And if you start trying to combine biology and history and so forth, you're very likely to perish.
Yeah, I got tenure 3 weeks ago, so I'll remember that.
Congratulations.
Good to know. I was curious about the sort of following up on the last question, because you've definitely written a big book with 2 capital B's. And it seems to me like most of the big books being written these days, if they are interdisciplinary, are written by humanists who go to the sciences rather than the other way around. Do you have any thoughts about why that might be the case?
Because as a humanist, I can nevertheless say that the most interesting developments nowadays are happening in the natural sciences, especially in information science and in brain science and biology in general. This is where the most interesting developments are happening. And you can actually even say that for the first time, maybe in the history of science, you see a single paradigm taking over the entire scientific world. It's the paradigm of data processing. Now everything is understood in terms of algorithms and data processing. It started in 2 main disciplines, which is computer science, but also biology. You can summarize maybe 150 years of biology since Darwin in 3 words, which are organisms, are algorithms. This is the basic realization, I think, of the biological sciences in the last century. And you combine this with the powerful tools that now computer science is giving us, and you get a winning combination that is taking over the entire scientific world. So you have now even economists understanding the economy as in terms of data processing and algorithm. The market is simply